I am so excited to bring this new episode to you today. And today you are in for such a special treat. So, as you guys know, I was a foster parent for 10 years and took in 77 foster children. And walking out of that journey, I had a lot of internal healing to do as you take care of so many children with so much trauma. It really can begin to impact you personally as it did me. And so one of the ways that I really began that process of healing was I found this incredible woman, Dr. Caroline Leaf, and began reading one of her books called Switch on Your Brain. So let me tell you more about her as she joins us today for this incredible episode. Dr. Leaf is a communication pathologist, audiologist, and clinical neuroscientist specializing in research in um, psychoneurobiology. She's published 19 best-selling books in 24 languages, has over 50 million downloads on her award-winning podcast, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, and over 9 million downloads on her YouTube. She runs research trials in mental health and publishes in scientific journals. She speaks to diverse audiences around the world, including neuroscience and medical conferences and TEDx. Dr. Caroline Leaf, I am so excited to have you here joining us today, speaking to this audience of foster and adoptive parents. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for what you do. And it's an honor to try and help people that are doing such a good job helping children.
I am so excited. So something just being really transparent when I was this, and this was a while ago, um, and as we stopped fostering in 2017, but in 2007, when I went through the foster parent training courses, and then every few years you had to go back through them again, but brain science was never mentioned, not spoken about. In fact, I've shared on this show some of the diagnoses that my daughters have are deemed incurable in the DSM and just offered medication and management. But I don't hold that same belief because I understand, and a lot of what I've learned from you is that the brain is changeable, moldable, and absolutely incredible. So I wanted to ask you the first question. Um, do you believe that maybe they've got it wrong about a child who has had this trauma? Is it able to be helped, worked with, um, healed?
My answer to that is, first of all, top end, yes, absolutely. Second part to that answer is you can never change what's happened to someone, or to our stories and the things that happen just never go away. But what we can change is what they look like inside of our mind-brain-body connection and how they play out into our future. And that is critical. And so that's where the whole concept of neuroplasticity comes into play. And when I've been in the field 40 years now, and when I was training, we were told by our neurology professors that the brain couldn't change. That was the belief in the 80s. From the mid-90s, it was understood that neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the mind to change the brain, and we need to really dive into that statement that I've just made, mind-changing brain, because it's very significant in terms of what you do and mental health and so on. But I did some of the first research in neuroplasticity back in the late 80s, early 90s, when they basically said you couldn't change your brain, and worked with people that had significant trauma from car accidents, as well as trauma from abuse and all kinds of neurological issues. So on the neurological side, as well as on the emotional side, I worked with both and showed in my research that, with your mind, you can change the mind-brain-body connection. So yes, there is hope, and yes, they have got it wrong. And the last 40 years, 50 years has been a very interesting time frame where, as we've grown in our knowledge of the brain, so society, and especially the world of mental health, psychiatry, psychology, medicine, has become very neuro-reductionistic, which means it's become very focused on, it's all about the brain. It's all about the physical nature of man. And if you can't see it, so the mind, which you can't see, and the spiritual stuff is, that's not really what we're looking at. We're looking at the brain, evidence in what we can physically see. So as we were able to see more about the brain, it all became about the brain, and the brain made you do it. And that's why there's this almost hopeless sense of, oh my gosh, there's damage in the brain. The chemicals are destroyed. This is imbalance. That's this, the genetics, and billions and billions of dollars have been poured into that line of thinking. And what's interesting is that that line of thinking and that research has only ever produced the answers that, oh, maybe this isn't correct. So it hasn't actually given us that answer that is the solution. In fact, the research shows the opposite. And the way you interpret the research, unfortunately, there's a massive body of scientists that have opposed the interpretation that the brain produces the mind and that the brain can never change, or that the brain, they believe the brain can change, but they kind of muddle that up, because if they believe the brain can change, that means that trauma can change, that the impact of trauma can be changed. But they say two things. They're speaking almost like back to front in tautologies. They confuse people, because they're saying, no, you've got this forever, like you were told about your daughters, but at the same time, they say the brain can change it. And so there's a lot of confusion, and that's because of a lot of misinterpretation around that research. That is the biomedical model. Obviously, not everything is wrong. Obviously, the brain science is extremely important. It's my field. I've been involved in that. But we need to not just look at the brain. We need to look at the psychoneurobiological impact. We need to look at mind, brain, and body, the three elements, and how they interact, and how neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain and body to be changed by the mind, and in either direction. And the fact that we are always changing. Every moment, every day, the moment you're awake, your mind is experiencing life, and they're putting that life into the brain, and the brain and body are changing. And if we don't direct the mind, then that change could be negative. So if a child's constantly exposed to abuse, then they're still changing, but in the wrong direction. So the networks are wiring in the wrong direction. That story is wired in the wrong direction, and it produces those behavioral changes that we see. The current model looks at the outcome, and it's the current biomedical model, and says, well, those are the behaviors, but they don't even say them as behaviors. They say those are the symptoms of a brain disease. So that even though they acknowledge that the child has come, or the adult has come from a background of trauma or a background of abuse, of whatever, they acknowledge that, but it's kind of like a split happens in their mind. And they say that doesn't count, because what we're looking at is the evidence in the brain, and the brain has changed, and therefore that produces these behaviors. So therefore, to disregard the story of the person's life, look just at the brain and say it's a disease of the brain. And if you look at something as being a disease of the brain, then you get those hopeless outcomes, because it's not a disease of the brain. No abuse is a disease of the brain. The cause is not in the brain. The result is in the brain, but that can change. So yes, we can land up with a damaged brain. And I prefer to say damaged rather than diseased, because disease has got so many other implications that are very scary for people and lead to that hopelessness of this, that you have this diagnosis. So and I know this is a long answer and we can unpack it, but if you go to the DSM concept that you brought up before, the DSM has been invalidated multiple times. It's useful only in that it describes clusters of behaviors. It's not a hardcore, reliably validated tool, evidential tool that tells us without any question that those are the symptoms that produce that kind of disease. So if you say schizophrenia or attachment disorder, all these names, they speak from the DSM and the biomedical model as though they're something like cancer or heart disease or diabetes, which are a whole different ballgame, which have had a whole different type of research. Those, we know that there's an underlying biological cause for diabetes. We know that there's a problem with the pancreas for diabetes type 1, and that the pancreas doesn't produce sufficient insulin. We know that that biological cause has been ascertained through good research. You can use specific medical ways of evaluating, and you can target insulin. You can take a medication and you can target that and work through diet, etc. That's been established for cardiovascular disease, for autoimmune disorders, and so on. All of those also, by the way, have a component of mind. But when it comes to something like a label like attachment, what did you say the label? Your children.
Reactive attachment disorder.
Yeah, it sounds like something that could be on a par or an equivalent basis of cancer or diabetes or cardiovascular disease or some kind of autoimmune disorder. It sounds like it's the same thing, that there's a bunch of symptoms, they've tracked an underlying, diagnostically tracked an underlying biological symptom, and therefore a cause, and therefore what they're treating, the medication that they want to give, is treating that underlying biological cause. That happens with with diabetes, but it's not happening with that disorder, because if you look at that so-called disorder, it's a set of behaviors that cross over other behaviors. And in fact, if you really look at it, there's all the behaviors kind of mesh into each other. If you look at the DSM, you could actually have multiple labels. Your children probably have already been given multiple labels. And so what we've got to be careful of is putting mental health on the same par as physical disease. It needs its own category. So we acknowledge that there are physical ailments, and we acknowledge that we can have abuse, and that abuse is experienced and can change the brain and can produce symptoms that need to be treated. Like you can develop cardiovascular disease, you can develop problems with your immune system. There's results of you can have a damage in the brain, but that is the result of, not the cause of the mental health issue. And that's very clear. When you look at it like that, then we see, okay, we've got to look at this in two angles. We've got to say, okay, those two children were adopted, they went through foster homes, they've got a whole history. That is what we need to look at in terms of how they're showing up in their behaviors. So yes, maybe attachment issues are a very good way of describing a very normal, a very realistic response to adverse attachment as a child. So their experience. So, but that's not a disease. That is a description of a set of behaviors. Doesn't mean their brain is damaged or that they have a disease that's incurable. That's not the case. If you just treat with medication, those medications are not medications, they're drugs. There's a difference. Insulin is a medication. It targets the biological symptom. A drug it changes the psychoactive nature of a human. They're not fixing, they're changing. So therefore, something like ibuprofen, for example, it's not fixing something, it's just changing the psychoactive nature of the experience of pain, but it's not fixing. So anything like an antidepressant or something like that is in the category of drug. So it's not fixing, it's suppressing the emotional response. It's changing the brain's and body's ability to respond, which is maybe okay for 24 hours or 48 hours, but not for the long term. Because what we have to do is acknowledge the story and deconstruct that story and rebuild that story and help a person learn how to cope. So your daughters don't need a label and told that they're diseased, and you don't need as a mom to be told that this is a hopeless case. You need to be helped to understand that your children are showing up with various different signals, of which those behaviors of attachment issues are one of a cluster of behaviors, and that the cause is in their upbringing. And yes, because of all of that, there potentially are physical things which we will need to treat medically, because a lot of our lifestyle diseases today, 95% in fact, come from lifestyle issues of things like abuse or things like whatever, unmanaged stress and so on. That's the more holistic and more realistic and accurate and scientifically evidential way of approaching it. But it's a longer route and it's more involved, and it's not just a quick diagnose in 15 minutes, stick a label on and give a medication, which in the long run makes the person worse because it's damaging the brain and the body as opposed to fixing something. And that's a long answer, and I'm happy to unpack any element of that. But it was such an incredibly good question. So
I love how you answered that. And it just made me think of just such a very basic example of if somebody breaks a foot, you don't put a cast on it and help them get around and wait for healing with the expectation that they're going to have a broken foot forever. And I think that's what you're saying, like just in such a very basic example is, and for me, it was my daughters were both exhibiting, and lots of parents, I feel like most people who are foster parents or adoptive parents are going to experience a child with attachment, some sort of level of attachment disorder, because they've went through the loss of their biological family. That is very traumatic for a child, whether they are in the speaking ages or not. They still, they grew up in utero, in their mother's stomach. They were used to the noises, her voice, the familiar voices of family. And to be separated from that is traumatic on its own. And but even for me, I realized the biggest shift through reading your books that I needed to make as a parent was knowing that this is not cancer of the brain in a similar way that you were describing. This is not a permanent condition. This is something that they are exhibiting symptoms. And I want to encourage other foster and adoptive parents out there today that even the most challenging behaviors are behaviors or is what a child is exhibiting because of the chaos that's happening inside that they don't know how to explain or verbalize or compartmentalize or understand. and make any sense of it yet. So if I have the belief as a parent, and this gets to my next question, if I have the belief as a parent that my child will be healed, I'm going to approach them moment by moment throughout their day in a much different way than I would if I believe this is a permanent diagnosis. Because in the foster care system, like you mentioned, my daughters probably have multiple diagnoses. Most of the children that we took in had lists of diagnoses and lists of medications. One child that we had, I think he was on 10 different medications. Four of them were antipsychotics, and he needed to see a psychiatrist in their office once a month because he was actually exceeded the legal limit of medications a child in foster care should be on. But for me, what we believed was that these were just trying to manage his emotions and suppress his behaviors versus actually healing the trauma and the pain that he's been through. And unfortunately, as a foster parent, you're not in the position where you're allowed to discontinue medication or go a different path. But even just as a foster parent or as an adoptive parent, having that mindset that healing is happening, healing is going to happen, changes the entire existence for that child without even speaking anything to them.
Oh, huge. It's absolutely huge. And I'm glad you said that because we are spirit, soul, and body. We mind, brain, and body. So that's what psychoneurobiology is. And I'm a psychoneurobiologist. So I look at the mind as a unit, the brain as a unit, and the body as a unit, and how they interact. And the brain and the mind are not the same thing, even though people would be, it's understandable if people think that they are, because that's the last 40 years that's been the messaging. But it's not. The brain is a physical organ that does the bidding of the mind when you're alive. When you're alive, your aliveness, your ability to be a human, to think, to feel, to choose, to respond, that is your mind. So your mind is a word that's ancient. It's an ancient word that covers the concepts of spirit and soul. And it is our aliveness. We even now with advanced science tools, we are able to understand that we have this energy force that, and this is nothing weird. It's a microelectromagnetic energy force. It's the same thing in a way that drives technology. So the ability for us to have this Zoom conversation is driven by microelectronics and and gravitational fields and quantum physics. It's all those principles. So we understand that concept is representative of this force that humans have. And that goes when we die because it's that force that keeps the brain and the body going. So the fact that your heart's beating in this moment and we're able to converse and we're able to breathe and we're able to make 800,000 to a million new cells every second, which is what we're doing as we converse, and what anyone's doing that's alive, is because of your mind. But the moment that you physically die, your brain and body immediately disintegrates. Within 30 seconds of your heart stopping, your brain is flatlined. And yes, with CPR, you've got about 10 minutes, sometimes a little longer to restore, depending on how the person has died. But that restoring is bringing that, allowing the body to then re-energize that life force. And I'm stressing this because the primary source is mind. And mind is encapsulates the mindset that you've described in terms of a parent working with a child. So whether it is your own child or whether it is an adopted child, which is also your own child, whether it's your blood child, or whether it is a child that you have adopted, the way you look at that child, you may not even verbalize it as you so beautifully said, but your attitude is in your mind, which is then in your networks, which is then being generated to that child. And that's it's a connecting energetic life force. And if they can't maybe verbalize because they're young and they're children, they've been through whatever, but they will pick up. And children are exceptionally good at reading nonverbal communication, better than adults. And they know from just looking at your face whether you are worried, whether you are saying one thing and believing another. I mean, even a 2-year-old's able to do that. And that is why it's better to be honest and open and to have groups and networks and understand and be able to express your emotions, because you need to be honest with that child. You need to be, it's okay to be scared at what you're seeing. And it's better to be honest and say, this is scary what's happening, or your behaviors make us concerned, but we still believe you can change. And we know that that's not you. We know that you're showing up like this, obviously in words that are appropriate for the age group. I'm giving you the broad picture. But the way we show up as humans, whether we are a little child human or an adult human, we are showing up. That's not who we are. It's because of something. And that's the mindset we want to convey to that child, and the sense of hope that, hey, we believe in you, the core of you, that loving core of you. We believe in you, and we're going to help you find that. And what the current model is saying is that that's it. That's who you are. It's not who you are. And that's because they're so physically dominant. It's dominant on a physical, there's two ends of the spectrum. And the one end of the spectrum is the materialist, and the other end of the spectrum is basically it's sort of these different words for it, but it's basically believing that we're not just material, that we've got this whole mind brain body connection thing. And then you've got your differences in the middle. And the science is very supportive of the fact that, in fact, there's no evidence to say that we're just materialists. It's impossible. So knowing that as a parent, as an adoptive parent, which is who you are, and you're obviously your listeners, this is very hopeful, and your mindset is very important, which comes to the fact that, I know it's one of your questions because you sent them in advance, but talking in terms of how a parent should manage themselves, and maybe it would be a good idea to explain that, and maybe just a little bit about the mind-brain body connection, that's just to make this make more sense.
That would be wonderful. Yes, please.
Okay, so let's talk about the mind-brain body psychoneurobiology. Mind being psycho, brain being brain, and biology being body. That's just the term that's used. As a psychoneurobiologist, I look at how a person's managing their mind, and I look at that through the evidence that we have. And the evidence we have are the signals of how you show up. The signals of how you show up are in your behaviors, your emotions, your body, how it's functioning, and your bodily sensations, and then your perspectives, how you're looking at life. So a child with an attachment, so-called attachment behavior, would be a child who's maybe terrified if you leave them, who is very scared to go to sleep at night, because if they wake up the next day, maybe they're abandoned or whatever. So there's that fear of being alone behavior. There's the terror of the emotion. There's the body sensation, potentially sleeplessness, not batting to sleep. And there's a perspective of everyone's going to leave me. And that's a pattern, a network that has been wired into the mind brain body connection right from childhood when it happened. So that core description shows up in different behaviors, emotions, perspectives. So that four that I just described will manifest in a multitude of different behaviors and emotions, but they go together. So the signals are behaviors, emotions, bodily sensations, and perspectives. They always work together. So that's how we show up. And you can start, as I said, with a broad description, and then you can go into the detail, because every child's going to be unique in how they show that pattern. And that's not who they are. That's what they're showing up. Now, the DSM and the biomedical model take those and say that those are symptoms of a brain disease and it's hopeless. Throw that out the door. Look at those as useful descriptions, helping you to understand how you or your child are showing up in the situation, and recognizing that you can, over time, track that back to the source. And the source would be an experience. And an experience has got a lot of detail, which are the memories. So an experience has memory. So the child growing up is the experience. The child's abandonment is the experience. And then all the details of what happened within that, which is unique to each child, are the memories within that experience. So the child, as a child's growing up at all these different stages, from birth through whatever age that they moved out of that situation and into foster care and then adopted, all of those are the experience with all of its details. And those experiences, each experience that happens, the mother may be shouting at the child, or the mother as an addict and not being able to care for the child, and the child, whatever it is, all of that is an experience that comes in through the mind. The mind has a messy component. It's good, it's not bad, but it's the part of us that tries to make sense of life. And because it's kind of like a toddler, it needs guidance. So we have the wise mind, and the wise mind is like the parent mind. And that wise mind is filled with wisdom. Now, all of us as humans, every human, no matter what age you are, your core of who you are is filled with wisdom. You have everything inside of you that is wisdom, brilliance, intelligence, incredible, and it's connected to the source of power, whatever you want to call that, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. And this is very scientific. I'm a scientist. I've been a scientist for 40 years. I do clinical trials. I do research. I publish in scientific journals. I'm a scientist. Okay, so this is quantum physics. It's Newton's physics. It's a combination of these things. And I say that just to reassure people. Okay, so the experience comes into the child's having. It's the messy mind without having the wisdom of a parent to guide them, which they don't, because they are in these bad situations. So instead of a parent being able to help the child make sense of what's going on, they don't have that. So they try with their messy mind to make sense, and they create coping mechanisms. And that messiness gets put into the brain, because as humans, we need a brain and a body to be able to to live in this physical world. So that experience is energy, goes into the brain and becomes a network of proteins and chemicals. And that makes like these little structures. And then that also, not just in the brain, but at the same time in the body. So we have 37 to 100 trillion cells throughout the brain and the body. And all of this experience in this child is being built into this mind, which is messy mind, which think of it like clouds floating around you, and think of it like a storm cloud. And that storm cloud goes into the brain and creates this really toxic looking tangled mess in the brain with all these upset chemicals and so on. And then in the body, in every cell of the body, there's also this tangled mess. And the brain has kind of the collective experience, and then each part of your body has cell collectively, like the heart has one collective experience and the lungs another. And it's amazing how it all works, and it all comes together the mind is embodied, if that makes sense. But this is toxic in this case. Now we know from Nobel Prize winning research that our brain and body are wired for love. So therefore, everything about our functionality is for survival. So cells are not meant to be tangled up, nor are chemicals meant to be flowing in havoc and chaos. But when we have toxic experiences, that's what happens. So instead of building a neat network with chemicals that are flowing in order, it's the opposite. And a lot of that goes in that combination, messy brain cloud, tangled up web in the brain, tangled up webs in the body. All of that is now the source of what drives you as a human. So as a human, here you are, life comes in, and what builds is how you function. That's what drives you. So if that is messy, it becomes messy. It drives messy. So what we're seeing with attachment disorder is a bunch of messy signals coming from a messy source. So what we need to do is look at those signals as objectively as possible, and then find the experience, which is basically can be called a thought, because a thought is an experience, and a thought is, and as an experience has much detail to it. An experience of abuse has got a lot of details of the abuse in all the details that happen. A thought has lots of memories. So think of an experience as a thought, the details of the experience as the memories of the thought. So what we want to do is go from the signals to the thought to all the details, and then we want to find the source and the details of the source. And we want to deconstruct that, take out the power and the energy, reconstruct it. You can't, unfortunately, I wish we could rip the thought out and throw it away and obliterate that memory from the child's mind, but we can't. But what we can do is, as the child is growing through different ages and stages of development, we can help them understand to a certain extent, and help them to reconstruct the story and empower them as the parent and the therapist and the parents. Parents can be equipped to do this, a child can be equipped to do this, and you do this over time. And as the child gets older, you become more able to bring more details in that arise and reconstruct those. And so you reconstruct that network from being this terrible, messy network into something that's actually healthy, and that has just a portion that's sealed off, that's the past. Now, that can never go away, and it still will make you sad, but your stories will always be with you. But that's in the kintsugi principle concept of the broken vase and fixing it up with a gold lacquer. These are the experiences of our life that we then use to grow and learn. So those are not meant to go away. They're meant to be reduced in the impact and the power. So what I did as a researcher, as a clinician, as a mom of four, and reaching millions of people now, is I worked initially with people in South Africa that were in very traumatic situations in the apartheid era. I worked in the apartheid era, in the transition period, and the post-apartheid era. I'd work in the very abused areas that were abused by racism, which exists, as we know, all over the world. But that was where I did my work 3 days a week. I would go into those areas and work with those children that had, just insane, and the adults. And And I also worked in my practice with children that also had extreme situations, but came from more supposedly more normal situations and whatever. So I had a lot of vast experience, and I saw very early on that we have to empower a child as well as a parent on how to understand how to literally rewire. Look at the signals, track to the thought, deconstruct and reconstruct. So I developed a theory, I developed a system, not a technique. I developed a system that is compatible with all the different types of dialogue therapy, act therapy, CBT. All of those are beautiful techniques. But if you don't put them into the system correctly, you're not going to rewire the networks of the brain, and you're not going to create sustainable change. You're not going to build those habits. Because if I help a child or an adult to go from the signal to that messy network and rewire it, if you just stop at a certain point, like, because it takes about 3 weeks, just the batches of 3 weeks to get to the point where you can work out the basics. And then from there, it's obviously multiple cycles. But if you, in a 3 week period, if you stop there, you'll revert back. You have to stabilize that new network. So you have to build it into a habit. And so what I wanted to find out was, how long does that take? And that takes about 63 days. Now, if a child's had years of, like your children have had years of things going on in their life as young children, that's not going to be one cycle. It's the rest of their life. But you do the healing in batches of 9 weeks. And so as a mom working with your children, as parents, or as therapists, whoever listens to this podcast, you can organize your life around these 9 week cycles, and you can adapt it to children. So what I did was, and I think you're familiar with this book, I think, Christine, How to Help Your Child with Their Mental Mess.
Yes.
I took all of those techniques that I've written, as you said, 19 books. This is the 19th. Excuse me. I swallowed and spoke at the same time. Sorry. As I took all those techniques and put them into a book. I released this book last year with the sole objective of these tools. I watched what's going on for the last 40 years, and it really worries me the way things are going. So obviously I can do what I can for my platform, but I wanted to equip parents with the tools to do what I've just described. How do I identify the signals in my child? How do I find the thought? How do I break it down and rebuild it? How do I make this part of my lifestyle? How do I do that? How do I talk to a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old and so that's why I wrote this book. This particular book is for parents to help children, or clinicians or whatever, and it works from 2 through 12 years of age. And it takes a system I developed called the neurocycle, and it breaks down this process of how can I do this and how can I implement this in my own home. But most importantly in that, and I'll give you some examples in a moment, but most importantly is, if you want to help your child with this, you're going to have to do it. Now, you know yourself, and you said it, it's really hard to be a foster parent. I mean, I saw as a clinician, when I heard some of these stories, and it's you want to cry with your parents, and you want to cry with those children. You got to be, how are you going to manage yourself? And so as a clinician, I would use the same tools to manage it for myself. I use this for my own stuff that I've gone through. So no, as humans, life is hard, unacceptable, and the traumas happen. So this became a tool that I used for me. And then I realized this was a tool for my patients. This was a tool for me to help me with my patients. It was a tool to help me being a parent, a wife, a human, and so on. So the how-to starts with you. You need to know how to manage your own stuff. And if you do whatever you do, we know children will do. So if you create an area in your home, and this is a really simple way, and I explain it in depth in the book. I call it a neurocycle area, because brain cycle, you cycle through your brain. You may want to call it your brain wiring area. You can find a word that works for you as a family, but allocate an area in your home. Something like maybe you have a wall in your kitchen that you can paint with the chalk paint, and you can have a basket there with chalk. You can have a notepad with books. You can have this book there. I have a coloring book as well, which we created specifically for this purpose, with the character Brainy that we created. And there's situations in this of a child that's frustrated, and there's a blank page, so they can pick up this book and they can point to that and they can color it in, and they can draw on the side, and you can make notes. And so there's the coloring book with all kinds of situations. We've got more coming up. We've written a series of stories with Brainy, who's the character that we created in this book, who walks your mental health journey with you. There's an actual character you can see over here. This is the Brainy, the toy. So you can, you have Brainy and get as many as you want. So on my website, you can get the whole kit, the book, the coloring book, and the storybooks are still being written and at the moment, but they'll be released hopefully in the next year. And the point is that, I mean, you don't even have to use any of these tools. This is what I can offer you. And it's all scientific evidence based, and it's not difficult to do. So you've got this place, maybe you have a little beanbag there, maybe you have a chair, you and your children as a family, you create this safe space. And in that safe space, when anyone goes there, that's your safe space to vent what you're feeling. Now, obviously, a 2-year-old doesn't have the words, but they can pick up a toy. They can pick up, maybe you have a few toys there, Brainy plus a few toys. Brainy represents how I'm feeling in this moment. So you demonstrate this with you as a mom or dad, and maybe that's you come home and you've had a particularly hard day or something like that, or your child does something that makes you feel very overwhelmed. So you go sit in the safe space and you sit down and you pick up Brainy and you say, I feel so scared. I've got such a sore tummy. My head is pounding. I feel like I'm shouting at you, and I'm so sorry. I don't want to shout at you. And I'm seeing this as like today's not a good day. I've just described 4 signals. I've said how my body and my emotions. I've said what I'm doing. I've spoken about where I'm feeling it in my body, and I've given my perspective. But in very simple sentences, in the book, I've got tables of how you would verbalize that step. So what I've done is I've done a first step in the system of rewiring. I've sat down in the safe space. I've taken myself out of the chaos of life and sat in the safe space. And I've basically gathered awareness out loud of my emotions, my behaviors, my bodily sensations, and my perspective in simple language that they can understand. So it's not about them. You are talking about you. Then you're going to reflect, step 2, and say, I wonder why I feel like this. I feel like this because I feel like this happened today, and I feel like I just feel like I don't know how to help you, and I feel sad because I love you so much. I want to help you, and I know this is not you when you get upset like that, or you get mad, or you hit your sister, or you threw that toy, or you whatever they did. I know that's not you, but I'm sad because I don't know how to help you, and I want to help you, and that's why I feel like this. I've given the why. Then I go to the whiteboard or pick up the notebook, and I start. If they are verbal, if they're writing, you could write some words, write those words down, sad, whatever, those 4 signals, or draw them, or combination, even if they're not yet literate. Words, they start associating words with pictures, so it's a great exercise. In other words, you take and you put all of that on the wall and with chalk, or you do it on the notepad, however you want to do it, and you just basically mind storm. You just put out there, obviously age appropriate, because you are demonstrating this for the child. If you're doing it on your own, you may want to do this on your own first without your child in your bedroom or something, and then you can go into the depth and all the emotions, and you may want to do it with your loved one or whatever. But when you do it with your child, obviously keep within what they can handle. And then you look at that and you go, wow, look at all these things I've written. At this stage, I can guarantee your child has crept over, is sitting on the beanbag with you, and he's probably picked up some chalk or the Sharpie or whatever you're drawing, and they've started interacting, and they've probably maybe touched your face, maybe they will start offering you solutions. They'll interact with you. They may or may not say something the first time. They're watching you, they're learning. They may just watch you. Every child's going to, maybe they just watch you the first 10 times, the second 2 times they sit with you, the third, it's going to be different each time, each child. The fact is you have stimulated a response. You've shown them and given them permission. It's okay to feel sad or frustrated. Even me, mommy, the big person in the house, daddy, the big person in the house, we're battling, and we're giving them a sequence because they learn that sequence and order out of chaos, because that's what we need to hang on to be able to manage that. And as you sit with step 3 and you start making sense of it, that takes you to step 4. I wonder what this means. Maybe we could do this. I think I'm sad because I want to help you. How can I help you? And how can I see this in another way? How can I help you today? So you're solving a problem. You are reconceptualizing is the big word. You're looking at the situation, thinking, what can I do about this? How can I change this? How can I see this differently? I don't want to shout at you, so I'm not going to shout at you because I know shouting makes it worse. So I'm not going to shout at you, and I'm going to say sorry for shouting at you. And I'm going to, rather, if I feel like I'm going to shout, I'm just going to go and into my bedroom, and I'm going to breathe a few times so I can calm down and then come back in. And so I work something out. Then that takes you then to step 5, which is, okay, that's what I worked out. Now this is what I'm going to do. And you write it down. I'm going to breathe when I get irritated. Or if I shout at you, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to maybe put up my hand, or I'm going to draw a little stop sign, or I'm going to do Brainy does this. Or you can pick up Brainy and you can say, Brainy, do this, whatever. Be creative. It will naturally flow. And as soon as Brainy does that, or you do that, you know it's, oh, sorry. And you're going to go, maybe you just step to the other, one step to the left or to the right, and you breathe in for 4 counts, out for 6 counts. Always breathe out longer than you breathe in, because that then activates the whole vagus nerve. It also changes the way the oxygen flows through your body. It pushes oxygen to the front of your brain, increases your ability to calm down. I mean, there's a million things happening there, and I give a lot of these examples in the book. And you then come back, and so in other words, you create an action. So step 5 is, what are our actions? I'm going to breathe if I get worked up, but right now I can say sorry. And right now, number 3, why don't we bake cookies together? And so now I've gone through a 5-step process. Now, if you do that multiple times, your child will come home from school, or your child will have a fight, or your child will feel overwhelmed. You've given them a system. They go sit there. The minute they sit there, they're in a safe space. There's no shouting, there's no judgment, there's only love. And that's the space where no one hits each other, no one hurts each other. If that happens there, we immediately move them from that space. We immediately do whatever it is that you're doing to stop any, because we obviously that's unacceptable to hurt, but that is a safe space. Very soon, children will learn it's sacred. They learn this very, very fast. I've worked in this for years, so I can pretty much guarantee this 100%. And that sacred space creates the opportunity. So you model it yourself, then you model it for your children. Now, in the book, I have a lot of examples, as I said, for different age groups of how to verbalize this, examples of how you can set up that space. There's tons of examples of that. Now, once again, I've given you an incredibly long answer, and I hope that helps guide you.
I think that that's amazing. And I would encourage all of our listeners, if you are a brand new foster parent, an experienced foster parent, an adoptive parent, if you're a parent, I would encourage you to go pick up How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, as well as the coloring book, and Brainy the Doll. What I love most about the coloring book is sometimes children who are, or most of the time, children who are coming out of these traumatic situations don't have names for the emotions. And I love that in the coloring book, it gives the names for these emotions, and they can actually put a name to how they're feeling inside, and you can talk about them as they color it. I think it's just brilliant, and it makes me just so excited that there's this resource for all of these parents to plug in. I would also encourage you guys, part of my healing journey was reading Your Mental Mess, which I think is the parent version of the child version booklet. And Your Mental Mess, truly, a lot of us foster parents or adoptive parents are getting into this and wanting to help children because we want to serve. And sometimes that desire to serve can come from healing that needs to happen within us. And so I would just encourage you to grab both of these books in a hard copy, grab them on Amazon or on Audible if you prefer listening like I do, and really set up this safe space with your child and show them that you can create new brain pathways. You can change you can be a piece of changing the trajectory of your child's mental health. I want to thank Dr. Caroline Lee, for being here today. I feel like I could talk to you for so long. There's so many topics we could cover, but I just truly, you are such a blessing to this audience, and I'm just so thankful to have sat with you today and had this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. Your questions were so amazing. And I want to just talk about another resource that I think is very helpful to parents. I have an app called the Neurocycle app. So it kind of all works together. And in that, you can learn how to do it for you. It's on at Google Play, obviously iTunes, and there's a web version. And that's a great way of you also helping you to use it for yourself, learn the system. There's lots of extra little exercises, and there's also a section for parents, so which goes nicely along with the book. There's actually how to help your child. So, for example, if you're feeling guilty as a parent, there's a great neurocycle in there to help you. Or if your child's having a tantrum, there's a whole guide. And so those kinds of things are in there. So we're trying to do as much as we can to, help you to help yourself, to help your child. Because one of the questions I get asked a lot, Christine, is if I had to do one thing to change the mental health crisis currently, what would I do? And my answer would be to equip and educate parents to understand this process and to help themselves. Because once you do that, it's just naturally flows to your child. So
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And you all can find her books or resources, how to connect with Dr. Leaf, in the show notes of today's episode. But thank you again, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
absolutely. Thank you so much.